One of the easiest ways to tell that one side is losing a debate, whether it's about politics or anything else that's grounded in the real world, is when they stop talking about specifics and they start talking about fantasy. Once you have to start relying on pure fiction to make your point, it's usually a pretty good indicator that you don't have much of a point to begin with. When feminists began citing The Handmaid's Tale as a warning of what Donald Trump's administration would look like, serious people understood that it was not a clever analogy or a useful metaphor. It was desperation. It was a bit like citing Shrek as proof that we need to open the borders to creepy-looking outsiders. No one who's attained even a basic level of maturity and competence would fall for that kind of thing. Unfortunately, as we've all known for a while now, basic levels of maturity and competence are nowhere to be found in the UK, which is why the entire country is currently transfixed by a Netflix miniseries called Adolescence. And the show debuted last month, and already it's something of a cultural icon over there. At this point, calling Adolescence a mere miniseries is practically hate speech in Britain. They prefer to think of the show as a documentary, if not their Bible. Everyone is expected to watch the entire show, start to finish, before they can engage in any kind of public debate on any topic. Now, in a moment, I'll talk about why this is happening. We'll also go through the show episode by episode and discuss the plot and how terrible the whole thing is in every respect. But for now, all you need to know is that, spoiler alert, the show is about a white 13-year-old boy who stabs a female classmate to death. And he was upset because she rejected his advances and then taunted him online about being an incel. And the show makes a big deal out of how online interactions like this, along with misogynistic content on the internet, can supposedly radicalize young boys and turn them into killers. From a production standpoint, the central gimmick of the show is that all 4 episodes are done in one take. At least that's how they present it, with no camera cuts of any kind. So you follow the journey of this 13-year-old kid as he's arrested for murder and processed, interrogated, and so on, at various points as a result of this groundbreaking approach to production, which has been done much better already in other films and other shows. But you're treated to uneventful 10-minute long car rides to the local store, which is really riveting television, but they have to do that because they insist on just doing this all in one take. Now, as far as I can tell, the point of this gimmick is to remind you of why things like cuts and editing were invented in the first place. And if that was the objective, then mission accomplished. But before we get further into the specifics of the show, just so that you understand the magnitude of the mass psychosis I'm talking about, you need to watch this interview that just aired on a morning show called BBC Breakfast. Throughout this entire conversation, the 2 anchors berate the leader of Britain's Conservative Party, a woman named Kemi Badenoch, for not watching this show, Adolescence. And as the interview goes on, the anchors become more and more annoyed with the politician for not showing the proper deference to this show, which the anchor calls a documentary at one point. It's pretty remarkable. Watch.
Have you watched Adolescence yet?
No, I haven't. I probably won't. It's a film on Netflix, and most of my time right now is spent visiting the country.
It's a 4-part series on Netflix, and everyone is talking about it. It is prompting conversations about toxic masculinity, smartphone use, young men feeling that they're being ignored, the idea of misogyny being increased in school. Why would you not want to know what people are talking about?
Well, I think that those are all important issues, and those were issues that I've been talking about for a long time. But in the same way that I don't need to watch Casualty to know what's going on in the NHS, I don't need to watch a specific Netflix drama to understand what's going on. It's a fictional series. It is not a documentary. What I've been talking about recently, for instance, is banning smartphones in schools. I've been going to schools all around the country. I was in Evesham just yesterday, talking to head teachers, talking to the students, and they talk about the problems that phones are causing.
The difference this documentary has made compared to, say, a politician, any politician, leader of a party, the Prime Minister, going around talking in schools, is this has made much more of an impact than any politician has in terms of what people are talking about right now.
Just to remind you, this is real. This is not like a comedy skit. And I'm thinking I should do this. I want to do an interview where we invite some important politician on, and I'm just going to berate them for 10 minutes about not having seen my favorite movie. I'll ask them, have you seen Master and Commander, the 2003 Russell Crowe film about a naval ship? Oh, you haven't? Why haven't you seen it? why would you not watch this movie? Because that's the most important thing, is that you've watched my favorite thing that happens to be on TV. We'll play more of this interview in a second, but it's important to highlight this particular moment. Remember, she says, the difference this documentary has made is that this has made much more of an impact than any politician has in terms of what people are talking about right now. This is the anchor's response when the conservative leader reminds her again and again that the show is fictional. She calls it a documentary and says the show is being taken far more seriously than anything any political figure is saying. But instead of treating that like a very bad development for public discourse in Britain, the BBC anchor embraces it. She's thrilled that the country has decided to abandon reality and fixate on a fictional diagnosis of their problems. And she can't understand why the politician is confused and appalled by all of this. And the male anchor gets in on the action too. He begins accosting the politician because she dared to compare Adolescence to Casualty, which is another fictional show that the British can't get enough of, I guess. And that's when Badenoch reminds them of the actual problems facing the country in, reality. Watch.
One of the things that I'm more bothered by is the fact that just yesterday we had Labour telling us that they're not going to be investigating the rape gang scandal, something which had happened all across the country. That's real. That's happening right now. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a fictional documentary.
Do you think
if I may just finish, we had thousands of victims. Female victims, those are girls, young women, and some boys too. I met the mother of a boy who killed himself after being a victim. I want to talk about that because that is real. And yes, I'm glad that the Netflix drama is something that people are talking about, but it is not the only thing. There are many other things that are going on. And my job as opposition leader is to hold the government to account, get them to hold a full national inquiry on what is one of the biggest scandals in our country.
And do you stand by the thing you just said a moment ago, that you're comparing Adolescence with Casualty? These TV programs. Did you really mean to say that?
I'm saying very clearly that my job is not to watch lots of TV. My job is to get out there and make sure that I'm talking about the issues that are happening in the country right now. There are many ways for us to be informed.
Adolescence has made more of an impact than any politician has on parents and when it comes to the issue of smartphones and misogyny, and yet you are saying, despite that, you don't need to know about it.
Well, no, I haven't said that I don't need to know about the issue. You don't need to watch it. I don't need to watch a specific show to know what is going on in this country. It's a fictional show. Let's talk about what's real. I'm going out there every day. I have constituents coming to me, telling me what they're worried about. I had a colleague, an MP, who was murdered due to Islamic terrorism. You look at what's happened in Southport. You look at what's happening in Rotherham, in Oldham. There are real issues.
Do you stand by not watching my favorite show? You stand by that? Have you ever seen Everybody Loves Raymond? Oh, you haven't? Oh, do you stand by that? Do you today, in front of all these people, stand by having not seen my favorite sitcom? Interesting. Now, Badenoch is trying to explain that in Britain, Islamic terrorists are killing people in the street and Pakistani sex abuse gangs are terrorizing children. These are real problems. But the anchors didn't ask a single question about any of that. Instead, they just continue to grill her over the 13-year-old white killer in a fictional Netflix show. We're supposed to believe that this made-up 13-year-old character, his name is Jamie, is representative of the real threat in the UK. Now, from a statistical perspective, that is not simply false. It is one of the most flagrant lies that BBC has ever told, which of course is saying something. The statistic I'm about to read comes directly from the website of the Government of London, and it's accurate as of 2022. Quote, despite making up only 13% of London's total population, black Londoners account for 45% of London's knife murder victims, 61% of knife murder perpetrators, and 53% of knife crime perpetrators. In England and Wales, as of 2017, roughly 38% of youth knife crime charges involve ethnic minorities, even though they're only around 17% of the population. And of course, most of these killers come from broken homes, as one UK study found. More than 70% of violent youth offenders came from single-parent households. Now, if all of these numbers sound familiar, especially the 13% accounting for 50% thing, well, that's because that's how crime stats break down in our country as well. Meanwhile, violence that's targeted against women, the problem that Adolescence is all about, is actually declining. Let's take a look at this chart. As you can see, violence against women in particular has been declining for decades in the UK. So there's no wave of young males taking out their aggression on women. On the other hand, there is an epidemic of violence that's being committed by Britain's non-white population, which has exploded in recent years. According to the UK's Office for National Statistics, knife crime has increased by roughly 1/3 since 2010 as the population has grown dramatically due to migration. Now, people in the UK can see that this is happening all around them, but now, rather than confront reality, they're creating a fantasy world in which white young men are the actual problem. The internet of the 90s promised a democratic virtual world where individuals, not governments or corporations, held power. Well, today that vision seems distant. Big tech dominates our digital lives with companies not just serving ads, but potentially influencing our political choices through controlled content delivery. The original internet promised personal freedom and control over your information journey. Well, there is a way to reclaim that control and freedom. It's called ExpressVPN. When you browse the internet, your service provider tracks everything you do, building a profile that data brokers sell to advertisers and government agencies. This constant surveillance means we're being watched and manipulated online. With ExpressVPN, my entire online traffic flows through secure, encrypted servers, preventing even my internet provider from monitoring my activities. I can browse freely without surveillance. Plus, I love the peace of mind it gives me when I'm traveling for work and have to connect to public internet that anyone could be on. Knowing my sensitive information is secure when I'm on the go makes all the difference. ExpressVPN also masks your IP address, which is the digital identifier that companies use to track and manipulate your online experience. Simple to use with just one click, ExpressVPN works seamlessly across all your devices, laptops, phones, tablets, even smart TVs. Find out how you can get 4 months free by scanning the QR code on screen, clicking the link in the description box below, or by going to expressvpn.com/MattWalshShow. The British government is playing a large role in creating this alternate universe for the obvious reason that it deflects from their failures. And that's why they're now instructing schools to play Adolescence for their students as if it has any kind of instructional value whatsoever. Watch.
It has sparked a national conversation, and now the Prime Minister wants to be a part of it.
And I have to be honest, as a dad, I have not found it easy viewing.
The creators of Adolescence were invited to Downing Street along with youth charities to discuss the show's themes.
The thing that's been really lovely since the show's been on has been hearing friends, family, people that I barely know contact me and tell me that they're having conversations on the sofa that they haven't had with their teenagers.
He's got something he wants to talk to you all about.
In order to prompt more of those often difficult discussions, the programme is being made available to all secondary schools in the UK for free.
So they're calling Adolescence a documentary, and they're using it as an educational tool in schools now. This is the British equivalent of the Handmaid's Tale metaphor, except the entire country is transfixed by it. So what is this show exactly, and just how terrible is it? Well, as it turns out, it's not simply an example of race swapping in this show, as you've probably heard many others say online. Yes, they've made sure that a white boy stabs the victim in this show instead of somebody more realistic, like a Somali migrant, for example. But if you watch Adolescence, you'll realize this is actually much worse than a simple race swap. That's just the beginning of what's going on here. Throughout the entire show, they beat you over the head with the idea that there's a vast underground community of white misogynist men lurking in the shadows because their brains have been poisoned by content that they're seeing on Instagram or whatever. For one thing, the killer's white male best friend supplies the murder weapon, a knife, so the killer can scare the female victim with it. And this is all very upsetting to the studious black student in the school who's dismayed by all the white male rage that surrounds him. Then there's a scene where the father of the killer goes to the hardware store and he's trying to buy paint because his work van has just been sprayed with graffiti. And then when he's talking to an employee who happens to be a young white man, the employee suddenly starts whispering, and the employee tells the father that he's on his side, meaning that he thinks his son didn't do anything wrong. And then he starts offering advice to the father about how his son could be acquitted by challenging certain pieces of evidence, even though the murder was caught on surveillance footage. The employee even tells the father to launch a crowdfunding campaign because there are apparently a lot of other angry white men out there who think it's great when white males stab innocent victims to death. Now, as maybe you've already realized, the irony, of course, is that there is indeed a large community that's willing to pay money to killers who stab people to death for no reason, but it's not a community of young white men. I mean, in reality, so that's what happened in the fictional show. In the real world, The fundraisers are being established for thugs like Carmelo Anthony, as we discussed last week. In fact, Anthony has now raised $500,000 at this point. $500,000. $500,000 because he stabbed a white high school student in the heart during a track meet. But in the world of adolescence, reality is inverted. We're supposed to pretend that all of these deep-seated cultural problems exist among young white men to the point that the father can't even go to a hardware store without being reminded of how many angry incels are out there. And in case you're wondering just how angry these 13-year-old incels can be in this world, there's also an entire episode that's devoted to the killer doing an interview with a female forensic psychologist. And for an entire hour, you get to listen to this child talking to the psychologist. And it's supposed to be really profound because this is the first time that you see how angry and vindictive this child can become when he's dealing face-to-face with a woman. And the dialogue includes truly clever lines like, what do these emojis mean? And the kid's hour-long interview with this psychologist ends with her telling him that there won't be any more sessions between the two of them. And then the child freaks out and berates her and has to be carried out of the room. So again, they're beating you over the head with the idea that he needs to control women with his male rage. And then the psychologist breaks down practically in tears because even though she's an adult professional who's trained for situations just like this one, she's still no match for the male rage of a 13-year-old kid. And the rest of the episodes are just as ludicrous. There's a scene where a white kid assaults a black girl at school. There's a scene where the black girl is distrustful of the police. And all this, of course, is evidence that systemic racism is real in this world of this fictional world of Netflix. Then there's the scene where the son of the detective on the case, a wise black pupil at the school, explains to his father, who's also the detective, what's going on. He says that girls at the school, including the victim, bully the boys online, calling them incels and so on. And the pupil explains to his detective father that he'll never understand just how damaging this can be to kids. And at one point, just to underscore how out of touch the detective is, he asks his son to define what the word incel means. And once again, the message here is completely backwards. Because they're trying to suggest, even when you have a loving and intact family, which is the case for the 13-year-old killer in the show, that it's still no defense against the emojis of the online manosphere. You know, having an intact family is supposedly no assurance that if your son is cyberbullied by a girl, that he won't go out and stab her to death in a parking lot because he's been, brainwashed by Andrew Tate. So the show makes this messaging explicit. It's not a very subtle production. Throughout the entire series, it's clear that the killer's family is very concerned with his well-being. They're with him when he's arrested. They're hugging him and showing him affection constantly and so on. The mother and father are together. They're married. And yet, to their shock and horror, their kid becomes a murderer anyway. And just in case you missed the message they're trying to send, the show's creators have given about 1,000 interviews where they explain that, in their view, having an intact family will not prevent your child from going out and committing murder. Here's just a few examples of them saying this.
This wasn't about othering Jamie. Don't put this in the extraordinary. Make this feel like it could happen to you, because that is the reality of what is happening in our world.
You'd have it by your side all the way through it, all right? Okay? Okay.
We wanted the audience to be thinking, there's no way he's done this. This kid couldn't do that. So for him to see this act committed by his boy, he's poleaxed, and his life from that moment on will never be the same again.
It was really important to Stephen that this wasn't a show that made easy answers. The one thing he said to me right at the beginning was, we can't blame the parents.
I didn't want Jamie to come from a background where his mum was a drinker or his dad was violent and aggressive. I wanted to eliminate all of those things. To try and get the audience to ask the question, why? But also, in the same respect, think, that could be me. That could be my child.
I wish he'd have bricked you. You'd have done better.
No.
Yeah, you would.
We wanted to make this feel like it could happen to you. The one thing he said to me right at the beginning was that we can't blame the parents, close quote. So in other words, the single most important variable that's indicative of childhood delinquency, which is a lack of proper parenting, was taken off the table before they even wrote a word of the show. Now, if you remove broken homes, mass migration, and Islamic jihad from the equation, everyone knows that knife crime would plummet in the UK. It would almost disappear. But those are the three topics that from the outset they knew they couldn't talk about. So they've decided to base the entire show around an extreme outlier fictional case, which is fine in and of itself. I mean, you can have a show that's based around some extreme event happening. There are plenty of shows and films like that. But the problem is that the media and the British government and the creators of the show are treating it like it's not an outlier case, as if the plot of this show happens all the time. So that's the kind of sleight of hand trick here. The producers claim that it's impossible to understand what drives the supposed epidemic of male rage beyond vague personalities on the internet. Watch.
I thought the show was a good watch, but it was a very intense watch. I mean, the subject matter was, it just feels so relevant to so much of what's happening today. And obviously, Stephen, you kind of co-created and co-wrote this. I'd love to start by knowing just what kind of triggered you to deal with this topic.
I read an incident in the paper, and it was about a young boy killing a young girl, stabbing a young girl to death. And then not long after that, I saw on the news, on the television, that, it happened again in a completely different part of the country. And a young boy had stabbed a young girl. And if I'm really honest with you, both of those incidents really hurt my heart in a way. And it just made me think, what's going on? Why? What's happened in today's society where a young boy, and they are young boys, feel a need or this age or whatever it may be, I'll never understand it, to kill a young girl, to stab a young girl to death.
Especially when you're dealing with incel culture, manosphere. I know Andrew Tate's name is mentioned in this, although you've said you don't really want the show to be dominated by that name.
It is mentioned in this show, but it's only ever mentioned by adults. And that's really deliberate, because Andrew Tate is the way that adults understand this issue. Whereas actually, the people who are doing the real damage are not him. He's not taken seriously by kids, really. There's a lot more pernicious presences out there that are the real damage. But it's not just about the parents, it's about everything. It's societal, it's governmental.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? We need to be talking about male rage and how male rage has been enabled by social media.
So you see how excited he gets when he talks about the Andrew Tate name drop. He thinks it's a clever way, to say, well, you don't really understand why we mentioned Andrew Tate in the show. We're just making fun of the dumb adults. But at the same time, he's obviously a dumb adult himself, and that's why he offers none of his own conclusions about what's happening in Britain. But it's really not hard to do. I mean, take a look at this image, for example. This is the Netflix stabber. He's a fictional character. He was supposedly radicalized by emojis and mean comments he read on the internet and the manosphere and male rage and everything and toxic masculinity. But really, we'll never know. It's a mystery that can't truly be solved. Now take a look at this person. This is the son of African migrants who stabbed 3 girls to death at the Taylor Swift dance studio. And guess what radicalized him? Well, as it happens, it's not much of a mystery. He was carrying an Al-Qaeda training manual around. So, on the one hand, in real life, the motivations are pretty clear. But on Netflix, there's no definitive answer. This is one of the most familiar tools that propagandists use. They try to pretend that reality is hopelessly confusing. You can't possibly begin to understand it. But actually, it's pretty simple. If both parents are responsible and present in the household, there's a dramatically lower chance that their son will become a knife murderer. I mean, if you stay married and you pay attention to your kids and you love them, there's an almost zero chance that your child will become a murderer by the age of 13 or any other age. Not zero, but almost zero. Along the same lines, if a country stops importing third world migrants, there's a much lower chance that jihadists will storm the local Taylor Swift dance studio. I mean, it's that simple. In the UK, common sense observations like this are basically outlawed, which is why we have headlines like this one from GB News the other day, quote, "A Somali criminal seeking asylum in the UK has avoided deportation after a judge ruled that returning him to his home country would cause him stress. The unnamed asylum seeker, who has been dependent on alcohol since 2006, would suffer stress if deported to Somalia, which would worsen his mental health." Yes, we wouldn't want to stress out the Somali criminal. They won't even say what crimes this Somali committed, by the way. The information is classified. All you need to know is that it would really, really make him angry and sad if he was deported, so he gets to stay. Rather than highlight the absurdity of rulings like this, of government policy that directly leads to more murders every year in Britain, Netflix would prefer to blame young white men who spend too much time online. That's the function of the show Adolescence, and it's why the show is revered like holy scripture in the UK, as we've seen. They're pretending fiction is reality because they don't want you to notice what's actually happening. Pay no attention to the reality you can see right in front of you. Watch Netflix instead. That seems to be the message, and whatever we do, we can't fall for it. Hey YouTube, thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like access to my full show with no ads, you should go to dailywire.com and use promo code Walsh to get 2 months free on all annual plans. See you there.